Speed secrets. Yeah, we're live. It's 12:43. Today we got some stuff to talk about, and they are formulas and why formulas lie. They're evil formulas. No, I actually want to talk about why the formulas oftentimes don't give us the information that we want. So, and I got three of them that I want to talk about. So, we want to talk about. I took a look at somebody's advice last night, and I think the time before. When I looked over at Greg's post that he did, his video that he did on, I think it's planes and automobiles. So if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. Good information on how to calculate the potential boost of a given supercharger, of a given displacement, I guess at a given speed on a given displacement. Did I mention displacement? Yeah, the blower displacement versus the displacement, though, of the engine. So how to calculate that. And also good, and I gave him props for the information on slippage, the air bleeding back across the blower. Although, Greg, I do have to point out one thing in your comment about the difference between the Gen 5 blower and the Gen 3 blower being just coated rotors. The inlet side is different, and the discharge is different too. So there's actually a few differences with those blowers, but we're not talking about that. I thought he did a good job, and I watched the video and I thought it was awesome. But we want to talk about that formula of deciding or trying to calculate the amount of boost that you run based on the blower, the displacement of the blower, and the speed of the blower versus the displacement of the motor. And in a very similar fashion, we want to talk about, and we've mentioned this before on the channel, calculating the carburetor size based on displacement, and then the ever popular 128 LSA thing, and then why those formulas and why almost any formula is not absolute. So we'll start off with we'll actually start out with the because the boost one and the carburetor one are very closely linked. But on the LSA formula, I get a lot of fanboys from David Vizard, and so again, I will say it again. I love David Vizard. We've spoken on the phone many times, and he's an awesome guy, and we get along great. And he's done like an impressive amount of dyno testing and lots of crazy stuff in it. And so he's awesome. Just like he's the kind of guy that you want to just sit there and take him out and have a drink and listen to all the stories because it's awesomeness. But the guys that are constantly chiming in about, oh, you don't know what you're doing, you need a tighter LSA or whatever. Look, so you guys understand. I've been doing this a long time, and certainly anybody that's posted something where they've made this comment, I guarantee you that I've tested more cams than you have. And I, along with the people that you mentioned that don't know anything about cams and don't know anything about LSA, all of those cam manufacturers know about LSA and they know what effect it has. But I want to entertain the fanboys for a little bit, and then let's assume that we have a camshaft and we run it on the motor. The reason that I don't care about LSAs is because when I'm doing testing, I'm almost never, with the exception of doing the stuff that I did on Engine Masters when I was a finalist in the Engine Masters Challenge, where I was trying to figure out whether or not I could put together a combination like some of these other well-known guys if I, did a bunch of dyno testing. With that exception, none of the stuff that I do am I ever trying to make the most amount of power possible. Somebody telling me that you need to change the LSA is the same as telling me, hey, Richard, guess what? You could make more power if you put a different camshaft in it. I'm like, yeah, I know, because I've tested hundreds and hundreds of cams, so I know what that does. But what the point that they're missing is that let's assume for a second we have a camshaft and that it's not the best camshaft. And then we change the specs and put a custom camshaft in it that has a tighter LSA and it makes more power. Let's even give 100% credit, which I don't think is going to be accurate, but let's say we did. And let's say that the camshaft with a tighter LSA made more power everywhere. So it did exactly what the formula suggests. Let's say that happened. What the fanboys are missing is that that's not why people choose camshafts. And that's the biggest thing. And I had this exact conversation with David Vizard, and I tried to make him understand. And I think that I did. We had a great, like I said, he's a fantastic guy. We had a conversation about this. And I said, look, David, even if this happens, even if we tighten up the LSA and it makes more power and it's a better camshaft everywhere, it makes more power everywhere. I said, look, this is not why people buy camshafts. He's like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't they want more power? I said, look, you and I both want more power and people want more power. I said, That's somewhat a universal thing among performance enthusiasts, but that's not why they buy camshafts. They're not buying it for the most amount of power. A guy that's buying a stage 1 truck cam is not buying it because it makes the most amount of power. And that's why cam manufacturers, Brian Tooley Racing, Comp Cams, Isky, whoever, that's why they sell tens and hundreds and thousands, I don't know, millions of camshafts. And this formula does not do that, because the number of people that are employing this formula and think that it's a universal absolute, in the same way that they think that their religion or that their politics or that their favorite color is an absolute. The number of people that choose a camshaft based on a formula like that is a handful of people. The other people that are choosing camshafts are choosing it for a variety of different reasons. One of them is cost. So right off the bat, if they're choosing a camshaft for cost, they're not going to choose a custom camshaft that has this formula applied to it. None of these people that are cost conscious are ever going to do that. It wouldn't make any difference if the camshaft made, you can pick your number, whatever you want to, apply there. Is it 10 more horsepower, 20, 30, whatever it is, whatever amount of power more it makes than the camshaft it's replacing. If it costs 1.5 or 2 or 3 times the amount of the cheap cam that they could buy, they are not going to buy it. And so this is something that the LSA fanboys have to realize. That's why that won't work for people. That's why they're not buying that camshaft. They're basing it on something else. What does it cost? Can I make it work with a stock converter? What is the idle quality like? All of these things, because these are important to people. What is the fuel mileage? Will it work with stock springs? Does it have the chop? Whatever the lists are of their things, of their criteria that they think are important, those are the reasons that they're going to buy the camshaft, that have nothing to do with that. And the people that are making the cam, the reason that they're successful at what they do is because they don't listen to a formula thinking that that formula is universal and satisfy the needs of all their customers. It makes much more sense to produce camshafts that satisfy the needs of their customers. That's going to make you sell camshafts. It doesn't make any difference that it has a 114 LSA and not a 105. We could look at piston to valve clearance. We could talk about a lot of different things, but that's basically it. Whatever the needs are of the people that are buying camshafts, and you fulfill those needs, then irregardless of what the formula is, that's how you have a cam business. And that's what people are doing. And so that's the thing, that formula is not in any way universal. All cams shouldn't be like that. That's just nonsense. People understand it. So now we need to take a look at the other two, carburetor size and then boost versus displacement of the blower. Greg was talking a little bit about that and he did a good job. So if you want to go take a look at that at his channel and watch that video. So if you're brand new to the boost and power and all that stuff, and you want to figure out a way to calculate like what size blower that you would use and how much boost it could possibly produce on a given displacement motor, he has a pretty good formula for that. And but here's the problem I have. I have the same problem with that I have with carburetor sizing. And I used to give Jim Bell a hard time about this kind of stuff all the time, because everybody wants these universal, easy to use things. Oh, this thing's worth 0.2 and 2 miles an hour. Every pound of boost is worth this much power. I'm like, Jim, the first pound of boost cannot be worth the same amount as the last pound of boost. I said, heat and temperature and blower efficiency and all of these things come into play. There's no way that it does that all the way through. And this is the same issue I have with this. When you're telling somebody that you can take a blower, and this comes way back from all I have all of these books because I've looked through all of them and read all of them over the years. That these come from the books, the B&M blower book, probably the Superpower book, probably a bunch of stuff that I have up there where they're using, because the reason that they're using, and then what Greg was going over, is the displacement of the blower. Basically, every time it spins of a given displacement, it processes on a roots blower a certain amount of air from one side of the blower to the other. So it grabs a certain amount of air and pushes it to the other side for every turn. And that's based on the displacement of the blower. And then if we then bring in speed, the faster that it does that, the more air that it transfers. Good. Okay. So if we apply that We can use the math to find out what that airflow is. And then we apply that to a motor. And then the motor needs this amount of air. And then we can calculate, okay, that should equate to this amount of boost. So here's the problem. The first problem is that when you're doing that, people want to know what is the boost at like lots of different RPM ranges. And unfortunately, when you're the blower, the amount of air that the blower processes, is pretty consistent, at least in a given range. The airflow needs of the motor are not consistent with RPM. Like if the blower feeds a linear amount of air, the same amount of air for each revolution, and then we go up in speed, the problem is that the engine doesn't follow that same timeline. It doesn't do the same thing. The amount of air that it needs at 2,000, it's not going to go up in this fixed fashion like the blower does as it goes to 3,000 and 4,000 and 5,000, 6,000 RPM. It doesn't do that. So even on a motor that's mild, like Greg was talking about, on a 1 horsepower per cubic inch kind of thing, on your typical kind of motor, we don't know what the boost is at every RPM. And in all of my testing in the last 35 years or so, if you were to put a roots blower on a combination and have it be like, let's say you nailed the throttle at 2,000 RPM and it makes 8 pounds of boost, to have it be 8 pounds of boost at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, all the way across be flat, I don't know that I've ever had that happen. So that would definitely be the exception and not the rule. But that's a very minor thing. The big thing is that when we base these things on displacement, and we'll talk about this as well with the carbureted stuff, because I have the same issue with the carbureted stuff, and I've talked to people about this many, many times, usually about big blocks specifically. But if we take our 300 and let's say we have a 350, I think that's what Greg used, or a 400 or something. But if we have a motor of a given displacement and we put a blower on it of a given displacement, what's going to dictate the boost is not so much the displacement of the blower and the displacement of the motor. It's the power output of the motor. It's essentially the airflow needs of the motor. And I'll give you 2 examples. So if we have a small block Chevy that makes 200 horsepower, not unusual, smog motor. I've tested some with a 2-barrel carburetor that made 220 horsepower or something. So let's take an extreme example. We have one 350 Chevy that makes 200 horsepower. And then we have one that makes 900 horsepower. That's not unusual because an unrestricted cup motor can easily do that. I know that these are extremes. But what I want to tell you is that if you run a supercharger on a 200 horsepower motor and it gives you a given boost curve, the boost is going to be higher on the 200 horsepower motor than it is on the 900 horsepower motor. Because on a 900 horsepower motor, unless we use a 900 horsepower blower, it's going to produce vacuum on the big motor. And that's not the important part because we're looking at extremes there. But if we draw a line from the real high horsepower motor to the low horsepower motor, what we see is a varying amount of boost that this blower would produce anywhere in between there. And that's the problem. The problem that I have with this is that, and this is why I use this power boost formula, is because the amount of boost supplied by the supercharger will be a function of, the displacement of the blower, how fast you're spinning it, but it will also be a function of the thing that you're applying it to. In our case, the motor is essentially the restriction on the blower. So if we put a blower on a 200 horsepower motor, there's lots of restriction. So the boost will be high. If we put it on a 900 horsepower motor, there's no restriction. So the boost would be low. In fact, on that application, there might be no boost. There might be vacuum because the blower would actually be restricting the motor. So anywhere in between there, we have, like, let's say we're making 10 pounds on the 200 horsepower motor. Well, as we go up in power output of the NA combination, that boost goes down. And we saw that on the test that I did on the 3800 versus the 4.8 liter, because the 4.8 liter made more NA power and spinning the blower the same speed, even though we spun it a little bit faster because of the crank pulley. But if we were to spin that blower a little bit slower, like we did on the 3800, the boost would be even lower. So the boost pressure came down dramatically. It came down by almost 50% going from one of those combinations to the other. So, well, we had a big change in displacement too. So Greg's right about that. But if we had the same motor, if we had a 4.8 making 200 horsepower and we had a 4.8 making, we made near 500 horsepower, the boost would be down dramatically at the same blower speed. So, because I've tested that many, many times. All you have to do is put a camshaft in a motor, and you'll see that, hey, look, the boost came down and the power went up, which both of which are good things. So and that's what I recommended to him. Hey, look, if you're in addition to what you're telling people, which is really good information, please also mention the fact that if you change the power output of the NA motor, especially if you do it significantly, you are going to significantly change the amount of boost supplied by the supercharger. And using that, we can step right over to the carbureted combination. The same thing happens. And I had this conversation many times, especially when we ran either the Cadillac or the Buick 455 or the 454 Gen 6 big block Chevy. When we ran carburetors on there, I ran a 650 carburetor. I got all these comments. The reason why is that carburetor's too small. I'm like, no, it's not. Stop thinking about it as a 454 and start thinking about it as a 375 horsepower motor. What kind of carburetor would you run on a 375 horsepower motor? You wouldn't think twice about running a 650 Holley, especially an XP that flows very well as a 650. You wouldn't think twice about running a 650 on a 375 horsepower motor because it works really well. Now, I realize that on a bigger motor like that we could run a bigger carburetor because it has a big signal down low. It's making good power down low because it's a big motor, and that we could get away with that, and that wouldn't be a problem. But my point is still, you have a given amount of airflow that you need at 375 horsepower, and that 650 will supply a lot more airflow than that. So that's more than enough carburetor. And that's why when people tell me, hey, look, you use this formula to decide the size of your carburetor relative to the displacement of your motor, I would do the same thing that we do on the blower and the boost thing. We have a 200 horsepower 350 and we have a 900 horsepower 350. I guarantee you we're going to want to run different carburetors on those two applications. They're going to be wildly different. I mean, the 950 horsepower deal, it could be 1,000 or 1,100 or 1,200 CFM. It could definitely use that much carburation. Whereas the 200 horsepower motor ran fine with a 300 CFM two barrel. It made more power with a bigger carburetor. But that's the point, is that whatever the NA power output is, that needs to be taken into consideration in addition to displacement when we're talking about either boost from a blower or carb size. And for the LSA guys, I'm not going to change their mind, but that like these other two, those formulas are in no way universal. And we almost can never get 100%. It'd be like asking to get 100% on the poll here. So we got to put a poll up. Hey, have you ever run a carburetor that is too big for your application? Have you ever run an oversized carburetor? Okay, let's see what we got going on. Just finished. Oh, and so if you have not, please, I forgot to tell you that also I just loaded up a 383 Chevy video where we tested different cylinder heads, different camshafts, different intake manifolds. And then I showed you a little bit. We delved into the air fuel ratio supplied by the single plane combination and the dual plane combination and how those differed. And then the compromises basically that we had to make with either one of those intake choices, because that's inherent, I think, in carburation. I don't know if $600 is a good price for 15 horsepower. The cams I found only give 15 horsepower. Is it 15 horsepower NA? Because then you could multiply that by boost and maybe get more. VVT, double over cam, custom LSAs, that's nice. Dual VVT on turbo engines, that's nice. This is why one of my favorite cams I've used is a 235, 239 on a 111. Makes good power, has piston to valve for stock pistons without fly cutting, but I'm always looking to learn and improve. That camshaft will work. But the thing is, that camshaft is really big for a 5.3, and so lots of guys wouldn't want that because I'm sure it has the chop. But it makes good power up top. But it would be softer down low than like a Truck Norris cam or a torque cam or something, especially on a 4.8 or a 5.3. But the thing is, that's why we don't talk about the best cam, because that's subjective. That could be your best cam, and I would go, yes, I 100% agree with you and support your choice. What's the power difference between a 400 small block and a 383 small block with the same combination? Is there much of a difference in your opinion? Yes, that's easy to calculate. So if we have let's say we have a 383 that makes 500 horsepower. 500 divided by 383 equals 1.305, and we multiply that by 400. We have 422 horsepower if you maintain the same specific output. You will probably have a bigger change in torque because you're only talking about 17 cubic inches. So you just multiply that by the specific output. It could give you a pretty good idea. The easiest way for me to think about this is mass flow, or how much mass is required. Yeah, if you happen to have mass flow data. But the power output of the motor is also a really good indicator and would be correlated with mass flow. When I had my 2-barrel stock 72-400, it ran faster when with a 400 was put on top. So a 2-barrel motor ran fast on a 400. It ran faster with a 2-barrel than a 4-barrel. I have an 850 Barry Grant on a 306. But the thing is it like a Trans Am 306 was a good 650 horsepower motor. Yes, and GM did on my 69 Z28, the 780. Yep. Stock LQ9 going in a rock crawler with an LS6 intake. Any cam recommendations to make 450 to 500? Yeah, I think on a rock crawler, I probably would go with a Truck Norris cam on that. I was on a live feed from a well-known Coyote guy, and he was adamant that short tube headers provide more torque down low than long tubes do. Am I mistaken? That's it. All other things being equal. I have never run a test on any combination, 4-valve, 2-valve, 3-valve. In the 30 plus years that I've been doing this, I have never seen short headers make more low speed power. I think that he might be new to this and not understand, because I've tested long tube headers directly on a Coyote, and it does not do that. It makes more power with long tube headers. Got done watching the video. The dual plane surprised me. That dual plane made pretty good power. I think if you look at the power output of that 383 with the cams that we ran, and especially with the airflow research heads, I don't think, and I don't remember doing a test on those specific intakes versus other, RPM air gap versions. I think that those intakes were not doing as well as they could have. I have a 69 Corvette LT1 350 block and crank, and a 71 Z28 heads rebuilt 30 over, rebore factory Z28 pistons and cam, rebuilt with around 1985, lightly used, never raced or beat on. What's it worth? I don't know. Did they start making the LT1 early? Because that was a 1970 version. But did they start making the blocks in 69? I guess that would be not unusual. 71 heads are going to be not as desirable because they're going to be a bigger chamber. Does anybody want it? Can't get the pole to load, but I ran an 850 CFM Demon on a 350 with Vortec heads and a mild cam. Too much, but felt great and fired right up year after year round. Good. We tend to, on the engine dyno anyway, we tend to run bigger carburetors than I probably would do out on the street. We're not doing quick stabs of the throttle. We're not accelerating the thing. We're just doing a dyno run that's wide open throttle and doesn't care about anything else. So we just want to make sure that we have enough carburetor to not restrict the combination. But a lot of times, like when we run a 750, and it made a little bit more power than a 650, I would choose the 650 on the street because it's just going to be better for, you know, let's face it, 90% of your driving or more is, you know, transitioning and not at wide open throttle. It's going to wide open throttle, and it's at lower engine speeds where the smaller carburetor might be better. Idle's not extremely stable. A lot to tune. Makes more torque from 3,500 than an LS6 cam and a 5.7 though. The LS6 and LS2 and LS3 cams are not great below 3,500 RPM. A factory LM7 cam is way better than those through a lot of the curve. You put LT headers on your Coyote. He's well known in the Coyote world, but when he was not nice about it, he also mentioned Shorty's flow better, so I discounted it, but I figured I'd verify it with you. There could be an argument that Shorty's flow better than long tubes, because this has nothing to do with out and out flow. In the same way that out and out flow doesn't dictate 100% of what intake manifolds do. I've run tests and we've done airflow comparisons between short intake manifolds and long intake manifolds, and it's not unusual for the short intake manifold to flow better, but it doesn't make as much power as the long runner manifold does through 90% of the curve. So a lot of guys get wrapped up in that, and you could find the same thing. You could make shorty headers that flow more than long tubes do, and they will still make less power because it isn't about total exhaust flow. On a long tube header, it's about the scavenging effect. Robert, 400, 1976 Dodge Police, non-emissions Charger, stage 5 heads, titanium retainers, Hemi grind cam. That's cool. Does it do big power and smoky burnouts and stuff? I meant to mention to Greg on his thing about, because he was asking about 400s and why nobody had done buildups on those. I wanted to mention to him that I had a 400M Ford, because that's what he was talking about up on the channel. Do you happen to have a Predator carburetor? I don't, and Westech doesn't have any either, because I've asked several times. Tim, what's up? Gen 4 4-point grate, 8-inch ITB, 799 heads, 232, 242 cam, planning to turn it to 8,000. We'll update with results. So 8-inch runners on that. That will be interesting. Do you have the ability to shorten that? Because I think that 8-inch runners are, it's not going to make peak power at 8,000, I don't think. My 306, if it made 350, that was probably generous. It had a Lenati cam, single plane, world product heads. 850 was overkill. Yeah, definitely. $350 from 01, 1969. They made lots of 350 blocks. That's my point. But an LT1, the LT1 engine option came out in 1970, though, right? Am I right about that? I think that that's the case. I haven't decided on micro squirt or mega squirt 2 yet. Would you stroke a stock 400 block to make a 421? Or would you recommend only stroking an aftermarket 400 block? Are you talking about a 400 small block Chevy? I think you should already start being concerned about having enough stroke in a 400 already. I mean, I've seen guys make, you could make a 427 out of that, right? But you start running into rods hitting pistons and stuff, and the rods are going to be short, or the piston is going to be, the pinhole is going to be up in the ringlands. Speed Shop told me at 800 CFM, let's see, hang on. Spread bore was too big, had to increase jets. Also, biggest accelerator squirter on back, still had to drill it out with hollow screws. So you're having trouble getting signal, Robert? Is that what was happening? Being told my Texas Speed ELC 7 cam 231 245 is a bad cam and that they have valve bounce. It's on a Gen 5 LT1. Are those the valve lifts with the stock rocker ratio? And you do need to be concerned about the stability of the camshaft, because that's a real thing. I would need to look at Spintron data on that camshaft to tell. I don't know that I can tell. I'm not good enough to tell just by the lift and duration and lobe separation, even the centerline number, to tell whether or not that's going to be a stable camshaft. A good indicator is lots of lift and less duration. But that's not, that's not universal like in here of our formulas that we talked about. 1450 CFM on a 396 big block. It sounded like it was drowning until you let off, and then it would rev up like it was going somewhere in a hurry. Yeah, I mean, you could have too much carburation. Predator carb ran richer than normal. I've seen a few stowed on shelves in Australia. Light burnouts, but running against a turbo Trans Am, shifted to third and stay with them to 130. Nice. Rusty, good morning. You add ring gap for boost, you add ring gap for nitrous. If you're running both, you add even more. I think if I was adding a lot of both, that I would have a lot of ring gap. I think you get to a point where you can't get that thing hot enough. You can't get the ring temperature hot enough where they're ever going to touch at some point. But I don't know what that is. I can shorten the trumpets by another inch or so. It doesn't need to actually peak at 8,000. Just be like, oh, you want that RPM range? Yeah, you can do that. We did some 8,000 RPM things that didn't make peak power at 8,000, because then if you make peak power at 8,000, then you got to rev it out higher than that, right? Woody's, you're interested in seeing the Spintron results of the valve train? Yeah, that's very, very important, and it's something that we don't get to see enough of. Brian Tooley does a lot of that stuff, and that I think that's great, because you can make cams that make power. You can make them more aggressive, and even though they're unstable, they make good power, and then they tear your valve train apart. We did talk about the carburetor formula, and why I think it's not, having it based on cubic inch displacement is not a totally accurate thing. If a guy is camming an LS, would it be best to leave the stock airbox on? I think that the stock airbox is going to be restrictive. You should at least have cold air going to it. If you have an aftermarket cold air, however you're going to run it, you should run it that way so that the tuner can tune it. Texas Speed has 660 springs that might help. Yeah, but the problem is you a lot of times cannot cure valve train instability. An unstable cam profile, you can't cure it with more valve spring pressure. It was too lean until I drilled the squirters out. Had big on acceleration until I drilled the back one out, so it wasn't too big of a carburetor. Do rings rotate while running? Yes, they do. The hole don't line up the thing debate. Yeah, they do. They rotate. And the top and the bottom are supposed to rotate at different rates too. That's what I'm told. 69. 69 engine options show a 300 horsepower standard engine, a 350 horsepower L46, a 390 horsepower L36, a 400 horsepower L68, a 435 horsepower L71, a 300 horsepower, they're not giving an engine designation, a 390 horsepower L36, a 400 horsepower L68. They are not showing the LT1, which when I click over to 1970, in 1970, the 370 horsepower LT1 does appear. So don't see that in 69. And I was pretty sure it was a 70. And it's definitely only a 70 on the Z28. And then on the Z28, it was rated at 360 horsepower. But like I said, the block being a 350, they had other 350s. So a block can definitely be a 350. And it could be a 4-bolt block. So that's not a problem. Can we add a fudge factor to the CARB formula for it to be a better idea? The thing is, it just depends on the power output. Those formulas work a lot, like the boost formula I was talking about, the CARB formula. They work for a good portion of the stuff, but they don't work for other portions of the stuff. So I just wanted to point out that was a thing. What does a 390 CARB do in place of a 750? Lots of cup racers won on fuel mileage using the 390. I have not heard those stories. Robert, thank you very much. 70 was the first year for the LT1. I finally got my block to the machine shop after waiting for 3 years. Oh, you got your block back from the machine shop. That's even more important. I hate the idea of rating springs just on lift. Yeah, that's just an idea to start with, that you go, okay, look, I'm running this kind of cam, so I need this kind of spring. That's a good place to start, but then you got to look at everything else. And what people do more often than not is they have a 600 lift cam. Oh, I'll get a 660 spring because that'll add more spring rate because that'll be good. It doesn't work like that. Just saw today, would accelerator pump or power valve circuit have an effect on the airfield curve? I don't think an accelerator pump would. A power valve circuit, I don't know that once we're already at wide open throttle that it's going to do that. But I would like to try a lot of that stuff. I'd like to try how low we load the motor and what effect the idle circuit has on what we're doing. Does it have any effect at wide open throttle? Does it have some effect, but only at given RPM ranges? The way that we test it, it would be different the way that you're stabbing the throttle and accelerating the car out on the street. But I just want to see the way that we're doing it. What are those things and how do they affect it? Late to the party, but glad you checked on Greg's airplanes and automobiles. Yeah, that was good stuff. I love to comment on it. I like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. So basically the 69 350 was a 327 and the LT1 was in 70. They didn't have a real high horsepower 327 in 1969. Did they have the 350 horse, the L46? The L46 was, I think the L46 was a 350 horsepower 350. Because I think that's the one that I tested. Yes, the L46 was a 350 horse 350, so it's a hydraulic roller cam. The L46 was the 350 horse or the 350 displacement version of the 350 horse 327, the L79. That was the 350 version of that. There were a few, minor changes, but that's what that was. The LT1 was a solid camshaft, higher compression deal. So those were not equivalent. Have you ever done a video where you start with an engine that's under-carbed and then work your way up to over-carb it to show the different results? I think that Engine Masters did that. I think I need to go back and look, because I know Brule talked about this, that I wanted to run a 650, 750, 850, 950 on the same motor. And I can't remember if we were talking about what motor to start with. Like, would we start with a 300 horsepower small block and then overcarb it that way? Would we start with a higher horsepower big block and then undercarb it and get up to the, obviously it'd be best to do both, and then undercarb it to begin with, and then get up to where we had the right carburetor, or put a dominator on it and overcarburate it. A good example of that is I did do that on the 6-cylinder, because we ran a 1 barrel and a 2 barrel and then a 4 barrel and then a 4154 barrel and then a dominator. And even breathing through the small hole that's in the factory 292 inline 6-cylinder Chevy manifold, it still went to wide open throttle with the dominator. On Engine Masters, they have shown an overhead shot that showed fuel coming out of the accelerator pumps at high RPM. It would seem the nozzle size could affect the curve. That it might do that, and I have videos of that as well, where I remember doing that way back on a chassis dyno, and that's what made me do it on the engine dyno here, because you can see it drawing fuel out, and in what I would think would be oversized droplets, like it shouldn't be doing that. So that might be, it's got to definitely be affecting the air fuel curve, right? The other thing that surprised me is, and this is why high-speed air bleeds might work at high speed and not just universally. Although when we've done high-speed air bleeds, we've done the tests, it seemed to affect it everywhere. But when you get into the throttle and you draw some of the fuel and the float drops down, you uncover passages that are not working. And then as it fills in, so at higher speeds, you would think that you've uncovered some of the passages, so it's more affected by other passages. And then the other thing that happens is when we were doing, this is when I was doing my Engine Masters testing, we had carburetors that had clear bowls on them. And you should see how turbulent and aerated that fuel is. You'd think that it would be best with raw fuel, but that's not the way that they were designed. You have to love Ford and Chevy derated their Trans Am racers. Yeah, that's not unusual. Floyd's Garage. Take a look at the video I have up. I ran the L79, I ran the L46, and then because I wanted another hydraulic flat tappet performance kind of engine, I also did an L82, which obviously makes much less power than those other ones did. But that video is up. You can watch that and see. Because before that, I did the solid cammed DZ302 and the L76 365 horse 327, or the Fuelie version, which is 375 horse, and then the 1970 LT1. I also did a 71 version, but I missed. All I did was change the head on that to change the compression, and it really should have had a different piston in it as well. But the hydraulic cam stuff did really well. It just didn't rev as high as the solid cam stuff did. 67%. Have you run a carb that's too big for your application? Yeah, there's my overcarb, guys. I have new in box flat tappet cams that'll probably never run. Yeah, Westech has a bunch of those. You already have videos on fixing carbs that aren't working. I don't have any carburetor rebuild videos, if that's what you're talking about. I always see lawnmower or dirt bikes that need a new carb, but I imagine it could be taken apart and repaired instead. I'm sure it can. The thing that you have to look for is what do the gaskets and things or a rebuild kit cost versus what does the carburetor cost. On some of these instances, like I bought a carburetor for, I think it was for my DT 125. It was cheaper to buy the carburetor already done than it was to buy the rebuild kit. So it just didn't make any sense not to do that. And I think also for one of our lawnmowers, I did that too. Interesting test. Completely stock L79. Just change the heads to a modern head. Nothing else like a TFS head. It should go up a lot. Like an Airflow Research 195 head or a TrickFlow, the TrickFlow Fuelie head. More airflow is definitely going to help those because they are head limited. Blue collar, the 224 cam is definitely going to make more power than either one of those other two camshafts, but it should make less down low. Like if you look at the sloppy stage 2 cam versus the Truck Norris cam, that can kind of give you an idea, or the best cam versus a sloppy stage 2 cam, that can give you an idea. The smaller cams like the Chupacabra and the Truck Norris cam are going to make pretty good power down low, and then they're going to fall off at the top compared to that 224 cam. Have you seen the videos of an accelerator pump discharge nozzles acting as high-speed enrichment? Yeah, anti-pullover nozzles and spread bores will stop it. Yeah, I was surprised at both at fuel standoff that happens and then also the random drops of fuel being drawn out by stuff. I want to see a stock 350 with a 416 head casting on to see if the compression is worth the small valves and runners. I don't know what you mean. So tell me which two things you want to test on that. Are automotive carbs usually cheaper to rebuild than replace? Probably they are now because carburetors are not cheap anymore. And I think that rebuild kits are pretty inexpensive. It's also going to depend on if something is damaged in the carburetor. If it's not just gaskets and stuff, is something actually damaged in there? Are passages blocked or you have to drill things? How flat are the metering plates? How flat is the base plate? There are things to look at, like how bad is the carburetor that you're rebuilding? How bad off are you? I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. I remember buying a rebuild kit for a Holly, I think for the 289 Ford that I had for doing the 289, but I think we found a carburetor for it. Not sure about carb size. Is a 600 CFM carb too big for a TBI 454 that only has 330 horsepower? No, that carburetor would be fine. In fact, we run 650s on those. Kevin, let's see. Which 4 carburetors were we talking about? Did I miss one of your comments, Kevin? I did see your name. Oh, there, Kevin. I did it at the track on a 427 horsepower 455 Pontiac, 650, 750, 750, 950, 850 years ago. And then let's see. And then your thing was all 4 carbs ran identical at the track. So did none of them make more power than the other? I wonder if I could find something with a carb in the junkyard to take apart and figure out how it works. Yeah, there's lots of carburetors there. In fact, you'll find carburetors just laying around on the ground. Just bought a new VRS Edelbrock carb versus getting the Sniper. Those are good carburetors. It's on the poll question. Is there something really? Is it really too big a thing? Well, I think the Dominator on the single carburetor opening on the 292 inline 6-cylinder was probably too much. But the thing is, it still took throttle and ran and would go to wide open throttle because it had that carburetor on a 4150 to 4500 adapter, and then it had a 4150 to 2-barrel adapter, and then a 2-barrel to a 1-barrel adapter. So it was all adaptered out. I grab a Q-Jet every time I go to the junkyard. That's good. Yeah, Kevin, if you put if the smallest carburetor is enough to feed the needs of the motor, putting a bigger carburetor is not going to do anything. And if you can get the bigger carburetor where it's not a problem getting it to wide open throttle, you might see no change, as long as they're all tuned so that they give you, one of them doesn't give you 8-to-1, that they all give you some sort of reasonable air fuel curve. It should all work fine. I have a small block Ford that I have to put a 600, and I have a 600 vacuum secondary. I have a 4160, and I have a jet plate. So I got to put the jet plate on there so that we can adjust it if necessary. It might be that it works perfectly the way that it is, and that would be great. What's funny is I ran 3 of the 4 on our 500 horsepower test engine before we went. Well, Kevin, you're a carburetor guy, so you know how this works. I mean, if we take if it's me or Brule or whoever, and the carburetors are just sitting in the cabinet. So if you've just taken one off of a big block Chevy that's a 496, and it's the 950, and then we go put it on a small block Chevy, it works just fine. It might be that that's not enough fuel, or it's a little too much fuel. Whatever it is, it's something that's easily cured by usually a single jet change, but it starts up and runs and takes throttle and they just work. I've had way more carburetors changing from different applications work than not work. Like, I've never put one on there where it doesn't want to start or idle or run, and doesn't go to wide open throttle. That's very, very rare. The 489 with a 212 at 50 cam and peanut ports only pulled 400 and 545 CFM at 5,300, and I had a 750 on it. That's not too big. Then my poll answer is no. Did it work? It works just fine, right? In fact, if you had a big block, it would have at least had a 750 quadrojet on it if it had a quadrojet, or it would have had a 780 Holly on it if it was a Chevy. And then or it could have had an 800, or did they make an 850 quadrojet too? A YouTube video where I heat a ring in a cylinder with an oxy torch to see how big it grows. It didn't take any measurements, just to hold my beer moment. We talked about doing that. I was just worried about the rest of the block, like taking the heat away, because in a situation where you're heating the ring up, you're also heating all the other stuff up. The piston's getting really hot. The ring's getting hot. The bore is hot. All of that stuff. I increased the booster size when running too big of a carburetor. Speaking of things starting either tonight or tomorrow, my C6 Z06 should finally start up. Nice. Sean, you have a scheduled dyno day on the 29th. Very cool. Very coolio. Coolio for Brulio. So I'm trying to, Kevin might know. Kevin, I need to buy some M1 and M5. Is there a local place for around West Tech where I can get that? I was going to try to get a hold of the VP guys directly, or the Sunoco guys, but I don't know if the Sunoco guys even offer their version of M1 or M5. So let me know, K-Dog, because I do want to do a methanol test. And a methanol plus, a little bit of spice in the form of nitromethane is going to be good. Evil formulas. Formulas are good, but like most things, are not absolute. Only place I could think of is Merit Oil and Bloomington. That's what Mahovit said too. I don't think I can order pails of that like online, right? After I financially recover, I think we're going to give it a bit of Gap Daniels. I found a standalone tank meant for my C6C that I can put some C16 into. That's good. So I'm going to go ahead and close out our poll at 68%. We got the overcarb blues here, huh? Like I said, they really a big swing in carburation. Works pretty well. I have definitely overcarbureted stuff. Formulae. I get it. I get it. That's good points. I can get rid of my 69 Corvette engine option thing. AFR is more important than CFM. A carb is too big. Will a better intake help? Well, any way that you can increase more power, any way that you can increase signal to the carburetor, that's good. You could do that with more power. You could do that with a change in intake manifold. Like if you don't have enough signal from your single plane and you put a dual plane on, you'll definitely have more signal down low. Pardon me for being mentally challenged. What is an M1 or M5? M1 is methanol fuel, and M5 is methanol fuel plus a percentage of nitromethane. Quadrajet's always the right carb. I like Quadrajets, and I especially like the one that was in the Cadillac that had the altitude compensation. I thought that was amazing. That unfortunately he passed away, but Cadco, Courtney showed me that when I was out there doing the Cadillac testing. Yeah, Sean, the spinny stuff definitely makes more power. And I want to run a carburetor on the M90. And so I got to make a carburetor adapter for that and make that work. But that needs to happen anyways. Why do so many people hate Q-Jets? I had a good experience with them. Does the Sprint motor have a carb? The Sprint motor doesn't. The Sprint motor has port fuel injection. The Geo Metro ones have carbs on them, and they also have throttle body injection on them. Reloading, there's not two answers. The thing that I discussed is the answer, because I told the guys that think that LSA being the only thing, that's okay. That worked for them, but they're in a distinct minority because people don't buy camshafts for only that reason. And so addressing all of the reasons that people buy camshafts are the people that are selling camshafts. I was hoping to see what happens if the Sprint motor is trying to turn the M90. I think it would have to be turbocharged to make enough power to spin an M90. But the Sprint motor is going to get an AMR 500, definitely. Got to go. I have springs to set up and heads to finish. Everyone has a boss. Nice. Noise. 2 more minutes. 2 and 2. Because I do want to run the intercooler on the M90. I want to get 600 horsepower so bad. You guys just don't even know. And I think that there are some things that we could do to make that happen. Porting. I mean, maybe even do some Super Richie porting on one of them. But bigger inlet, definitely. No accessories. The lightweight drive assembly, methanol, whatever we got to do, just not nitrous. Yeah, we are. I have an air water intercooler coming from the guys at TIC. It's designed for that high rim. Yeah. 600's got to be possible, right? And with this blower, now I could go get the double wazoo like Magnuson version, but I don't want to do that. Storm season is supposedly over in Florida. Yet here we are. I know. I mean, it was raining while we were there, while we were snake hunting, but I didn't want to be there during hurricanes. Would it be cheating to give the 3800 a bit more compression? No, we could do. That's actually one of the tests I wanted to do. I wanted to do the L36. The NA version, and then put all that stuff, just do a top swap basically on an NA version is what they call it, what the cool guys call it. and it would help it make more power. But I'm not doing that on the 3800. I'm doing that on the LS because we're not going to make 600 with that blower on a 3800. I don't think that would be a lot. I think that I have a list of things that I need to get, and the thing that I'm curious about is I don't know if the intercooler is going to hurt us or help us. The other thing that I'm going to do, I need to write that down. Air hat. I want to take like airflow readings while we're running this blower and see what's going on. M90 might make 600 on your engine. Well, that's all we have to do is we put it on an 800 horsepower motor. It'll definitely make 600. No rain dance. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. Hopefully I will be back tonight. I think I will be. We got some stuff to do. It's Friday. You ain't got no job. You got nothing to do. You know the rest.